It's like the epitome of evil. I don't think there's anything worse.
It's patriarchal. It's authoritarian. Women don't have rights. Children break.
The IBLP teachings aren't Christianity. There's something entirely different.
There's been so many people that have been hurt by this so-called ministry.
I just hope and pray that this never happens to anyone else ever again.
On today's episode, we're going to take a cold, hard look at the docu-series that is airing on Amazon Prime called Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets. And we're doing a series on obedience right now. And last week we looked at the fact that fathers need to be in obedience and submission. We're also going to be talking about how they can lead in training in obedience and submission. And we thought it would be interesting to look at what is the culture telling us about obedience and submission, and what are our reactions, looking at some of the false claims and some of the valid accusations from that series. All that's coming up. And this is Abraham's Wallet. Join us weekly and create a culture in your family of multi-generational prosperity, spiritually, relationally, physically, intellectually, and financially. Run your home, your dough, like a biblical boss. I've been watching a 4-part documentary on Amazon Studios, which I found out was the largest debut of any documentary series ever produced by Amazon Studios. It's very, very popular. I'm not the only one that's seen this show.
And what's this show called?
It's called Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets.
And
that's what it's called.
Can we just take a minute and maybe back up and ask ourselves, I don't think we morally or philosophically align with the band REM, but we can appreciate that Michael Stipe made some great music in the 80s and 90s. And if you're going to name the best selling, or whatever you call streaming, the biggest streaming debut documentary in Amazon history, maybe pick a song from the many that Michael Stipe wrote that was good instead of that one. What do you say?
I'm going to let your statement stand. I didn't like anything that he did.
Okay, so you're out on REM.
I'm out.
2 down for REM. Okay, continuing.
Now, let me just say about, you heard, I think, in the introduction, kind of why we're approaching this. And I just want to say, you don't have to watch this series. You're going to think that I'm sure that by our talking about it, it's going to pique your interest. And you don't have to watch it because I have found that it has rather rattled some people. So we're not recommending it by talking about it. We are commenting on it because I can think of 3 reasons I've outlined. One is because there are abuses everywhere of everything. Okay, I've got a cute little bagel shop right outside the window here where I'm recording, and I bet there are people in there who don't do things right in their company. There might be people who they I don't know, they steal.
And
they steal mayonnaise at the end of the night. I don't know. There are people who kick puppies, and there are people who steal, and there are people who are mean to their children, and there are people who are mean to their wives. It's true everywhere in every strata of society. Upsetting thing to some people is that this show accuses historical Christianity of being a breeding ground of every kind of abuse. What's fun about this series to its makers is just finding something that's gone wrong and then enjoying getting to say that everything connected to that is horrible. So somebody got busted for a crime, well, then their whole family's belief system is corrupt. There's a domineering man out there somewhere, well, then male headship is destructive in its very essence. These are people who attend pro-life marches and we find errors in their lives. Well, then that tells us that people who are pro-life are women-hating crazies. That's the first thing I want to comment on, is I just like to pull the pin out of some of these accusations. We're going to do that. Second reason that I want to comment on this, I just want you to know that the culture at large and the makers of cultural artifacts like this documentary series, they're coming for you. As crazy as that sounds very end of the world. But listen, here's Psalm 2. Psalm 2 says, the rulers gather together against the Lord and against his anointed. Now, his anointed can mean two things. It can mean Jesus, the anointed one, the Messiah, the Christ, and it can also mean his bride. We are the anointed one collectively. So it says the rulers gather together against the Lord and against his anointed. And it says that they say, let us break off their chains and throw off their fetters. I'm teaching a series right now with a little ministry class, and we're learning about obedience. And the fact is, the biblical concept of obedience requires that you align yourself even as a slave unto God, so that you say yes to him before he even speaks. The answer is yes. Whatever you say, the answer is yes. And people have a fallacious mindset that if I didn't do that with God, I would be free to do this, to do anything I want anytime. They think the options are slavery to God or freedom. Those are not really the options. The options are slavery to God or slavery to self and all of the demons that come along with that line of thinking. Slavery to God or slavery to self. This whole series is this bald-faced attempt to paint not just fundy zealots, but all Bible-believing Christians as manipulative, sexual predator wackadoodles. And the idea is if we can throw off those constraints that those people and their God and their Bible are trying to foist onto me, then I could be truly free. And I'm telling you, that's a false dichotomy. And this wackadoodle thing, this broad brush of wackadoodles, it means you. If you're listening to this, they're talking about you, by the way, if you're a Bible believer who wants to follow God's ways. So I just want to respond to all of these allegations, not to them. I mean, I don't know any of these people, or I don't have any need to respond to them personally, but I want to respond to you all, our listeners, because you might not have as much experience in these arenas as we do. And you might wonder, hey, is this stuff true? And so I want to address those. And the third thing, and then I'll let you comment, Mark. I mean, my ears really perked up when there was a little quote on there, and somebody said, these people believe that you should have as many children as you possibly can. And my ears perked up, and I just had this feeling like, hey, wait a second, that's our corner. They're walking on our corner. And I'll get to that in a second. I don't actually believe everyone should have as many children as they possibly can. But I just thought, wait a second, they're making comments about me and my people, and the world is listening to their comments about us instead of our comments about us. So there is a clear attack on the way of life that we are walking in. We think that when you put together the Bible's instruction on family, on male and female roles, on money, and how to interface with the world, there are some pretty clear guardrails that have been set out. And this series would like to castigate all of those guidelines. And I simply want to shore up ground that might suddenly feel shaky for people who are unduly influenced by such things.
Really, if you were dropped into our world from another planet and all you knew was what was in that documentary and you heard us talking obedience, you'd go, uh-oh, we've heard this before and we know where it ends. And
that's exactly right.
You know, I'm looking forward to the conversation because we intentionally did not preview between each other. Well, how do you feel about this and this? So there might be places where we agree or disagree, but there's so many things that I just felt totally conflicted about as I watched. And I'm looking forward to kind of picking it apart with you.
There's two main characters in this series, and I'd like to comment on them in order. The first is the guy who, he's the patriarch of the Duggar family. This is the dirty, dark secrets of the Duggar family. And this is a guy who came into the collective consciousness because he had this TLC cable reality show called 19 and Counting. It was about a large family. I don't think watched an episode of that, but I've seen clips of it. You know, it's like, how does a 20-person family handle laundry? So all that's kind of like, oh, interesting. You and I were just saying that I kind of feel for the guy. His backstory is that he came from poverty. he was working very hard while he was growing this large family. He seemed, certainly up front, very sincere. He seemed very earnest. He's trying to do his best. And he gets influenced by our second main character, Bill Gothard, who must have sounded to him like a guy that had all the answers, because Jim Bob did not have the answers in rural Arkansas about how to run his family, and he did not know how to do it all. And this guy makes it sound like, oh, I can tell you how to run your life. So he turned to this guy. Seems to me that over the years, his character got soured by fame and money, which, word to the wise, that's super common that happens to people. His character got soured by fame and money, and he ended up betraying his own children because of the action. He got addicted to the action of being a TV star. I'm sure that this guy felt like everything that he did it for God's purposes. Even as he's betraying his own children to get his TV show back on the air, he's had children who've fallen out of favor, famously been indicted, going to prison, and he's trying to angle himself back onto the air. And I'm sure that in his mind, he's thinking, this is for the glory of God. This is the best thing for the kingdom, for our family to be on TV. And I would like to also say, you can't know how super common that is for megachurch pastors, for authors, for Christian singers, people who are on a stage and they are public Christians. They can justify just about anything they do because they believe that them being in public and being successful is good for the business of God. It sounds like that's what happened to this guy. I know that means nothing in the final analysis. It just helps me be a little bit merciful and graceful in the way that I think of this guy. What do you think of Jim Bob?
Yeah, I just feel like even you and I personally, Steve, have seen individuals where there's either a flash of fame or some talent or something, and they do exactly what Jim Bob did, which is, to me, the nadir of the Jim Bob's kind of character was when his son was going through trial to be put in prison for pedophilia. And he thought, well, I'm going to run for office during this time. I'm going to put myself forward as someone who should be leading not only my household, but other households, and maybe even the whole state of Arkansas. And I agree with you. It doesn't absolve him. He did some really dirty things. I was talking to my wife about the show and saying, do we think that these people are just good-hearted who made a terrible mistake in how they dealt with gross sin in their family? Or was it sinister from the beginning? And of course, the people making the documentary want to say, well, this is just what happens when you become a Christian fundamentalist. Sure. And like you said at the beginning, they lump anyone who has a remotely orthodox kind of set of Christian beliefs into that fundamentalist camp. You see the guy walk up to random people that come up for an autograph and see if maybe he could share the gospel with them.
I know.
And do we think that was just performance for TV? I don't know. I don't know the man's heart. It seems like he truly believed it. They spent a ton of their energy kind of preaching this message that they felt like had been impactful to their family. And the words they said were true about Jesus being the only way and about sort of so many things. A lot of the rest of your judgment of Jim Bob comes down to guessing things about his motivations and character that honestly, I don't know, neither do his detractors. So it's hard to do that math.
Okay, now the other main character is Bill Gothard. Now, Bill Gothard was a dude who started teaching classes and then publishing literature on, it was basically the ideal Christian life. I will tell you how to turn the Bible into practical action steps so that your family will look right. And I use that word choicefully, like it needs to be right. And we've decided what's right, and we're going to tell you what it is. Mark, did you have any experience or ever heard of this guy before?
No, I hadn't heard of Bill Gothard.
Well, I'll just throw in here that I have memories of this guy. Somehow he got his hooks into my home church, which is Champion Forest Baptist Church down in Houston, Texas. And Bill Gothard and the crew swung through town. And as I recall, they don't just show up for a weekend. Like, they kind of would make their home in your church for a couple of months. And their idea was, everywhere our tendrils can go, we're going to take over your children's program. We're taking over the students. We're taking over weekend services. And they just kind of put their stuff out everywhere. And I remember a couple of, I'm guessing this is about 1988. I think I was in high school. I remember when this guy came into town, it was very contentious, even on the staff of the church, to Sunday school teachers kind of going like, I don't know what we think about this. There was a lot of hubbub. It was very contentious. And I remember that the feeling in the room, my blessed youth minister John Wills would kind of talk under his breath at what was happening and say, it seems very controlling, it seems very dogmatic, and it seems very prescriptive. And those three words, dogmatic, controlling, and prescriptive, are really not the way that it tends to go in the following Jesus world. What tends to happen when Jesus gets a hold of someone's heart is that we care for somebody's heart, and then the way they express theirself out in the world, that's kind of between them and God. And you kind of can manage and coach some people, but when they're doing their thing, we're not supposed to be. Disciple making doesn't mean being controlling, dogmatic, or prescriptive to people. It just means that we get involved in their life and we're watching for pain points. So the one I just got him before we move on, I got to tell this one tale that I thought was fascinating. So here I am, I don't know, maybe a high school sophomore. And I remember one of these people saying, it might have been Bill himself, I don't know, but there was a big student gathering. They're trying to warn us of the dangers of lust, which is, very common thing to talk high school students who are trying to follow Jesus. We talk about lust all the time. And so I'm listening closely with that whole world, honestly, being very foreign to me. One of their teachers says, now students, when you take a shower, be sure not to linger looking at yourselves in the mirror when you're naked. I remember thinking, what? And I remember coming home and asking my parents about that. It's never crossed my mind, one, to stare at myself. Two, I wouldn't think that it was like dangerous if I was. What is that? Oh my gosh. I just remember them hitting the roof and going like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Forget that. Forget the guy ever said that. Just wash that out of your brain. It's nothing. There's nothing wrong with you. You're fine. And they shot something up during the documentary that was like, nakedness arouses lustful something. I just thought, what a weird rule to set down. That would never have crossed my mind. So that's my one enduring memory of the Basic Life Institute coming to town. All right.
Wow.
From here, do you have any comments on that?
No, I just love that story and the fact that you bumped into the Basic Life Institute.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it feels like projection, right? That they might struggle with taking a good long gander at a naked adolescent, so they want to make sure you don't, even if you're the adolescent.
Right. I don't know. So bizarre. There are so many accusations in this docu-series. That's basically the reason it exists, is to make accusations. So I just thought it might be helpful to break it into two categories: legitimate accusations and false accusations. So I'd like to start with legitimate accusations. I just kind of want to go on record to go like, hey, everybody, we know that's wacky. We're with you on that. So I think it was in part 3 that this girl, one of the Duggars, her name is spelled Jinger, which I would probably be tempted to pronounce Ginger, but I think her name is Jinger. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think Jinger, talking about her childhood, said you couldn't wear shorts, you couldn't watch TV, and you couldn't be your actual self. I took a note when she said that because it's so sad to hear a kid who, by the way, she's not nuts. She has gone on in her life to be redeemed of all whatever the pain is from her past. And by the way, side note, the way that she was redeemed was she found a good man, Christian guy who has led her into grace while still being strong. When I hear her describe her childhood in that way, I just think, parents can run their homes however they want, and we can put down rules as we see fit. And I would just caution everybody against doing anything that comes across, again, as controlling, dogmatic, and prescriptive. So when your child is young and dumb and they don't know any better, you can say, and this is even going to sound judgmental because it's a call that each family can make on its own. I'll just speak for my own family. Girls, we're not going to wear bikinis. That's not happening in our house. So you make that kind of declaration when they're young and you are their morality. What's more important as they age is that I teach my family about the principle of, say, modesty. Now, when they get into their growing up into adulthood, guess what? They can run modesty however they want to. It's their life. I'm not there to be prescriptive and dogmatic about it. There has to be this increasing grace given, this increasing freedom given as we trust our children. We know that they know foundational principles and we can turn them loose. Anyways, I think that accusation is legitimate, that there is so much prescriptive stuff in that scene. I didn't know that, but I see it and I go, hey, I don't believe in that. That's not right.
I hate to keep bringing it up, but it harkens back to your Twitter engagement with our buddy who was prohibiting yoga pants. And
exactly right.
I think that, again, a lot of the things in this, even in this documentary, the specific things they said, I was like, well, that's true. I agree with you. But the way that you're getting at it is no bueno. So you and I both
That's
have
right.
all daughters. So modesty is one that I think is really good to talk about because it's a place where the world loves to look at how we might do modesty inside of our families with girls and say, well, that's a patriarchal man trying to control a woman's body. And I definitely tell my kids, try again if they come out of their room wearing something that's not modest. But, that's true if it's a 7-year-old. And I don't have a 7-year-old who's out there trying to flaunt their body in a way that is suggestive. As they get older, and I have a 13-year-old, then we start to talk about, well, there's a power that is meant for a purpose behind your beauty. And we need to learn to use that to God's glory. I'm going to be much more prone at that point to say, like, do you think this outfit does that? And I've got my antennas up for if I hear, yes, Dad, because that's what you want me to, that's what I think I want you to say. That's something I've got my antennas up and I'm like, well, we're not there yet. It doesn't mean I'm going to say like, go wear whatever you want when you're 13 years old. But I am really trying to get to the heart and disciple the heart so that, like you said, there's going to be a point when they're 19 that I'm not going to say you can't wear X, Y, or Z. I'm going to potentially, I could see myself even to a grown daughter saying, hey, how's your heart when it comes to modesty? But I'm not going to be making declarations about what you are or aren't allowed to do by then. It's just a process, I think. And the place I saw everything go sideways in this documentary was there was almost no discipleship of hearts. There was a lot of rules and just,
that's great.
Let's keep rolling. We're going to just make more kids. We don't have time to disciple hearts. So we're just going to give you the rules. And we assume that if you follow the rules until we can get you married, then it'll all be fine. Some of them made it to that finish line. They actually, by the grace of God, got to a point where they had made wise choices with sex stuff, because that's one that they really like to harp on in this documentary. And then they kind of woke up and went, holy cow, I can't believe I ran that gauntlet without getting crushed. Obviously, some other people, the rules became like, I can get around these and then I'm good. And I can actually, in the case of the oldest son, I can dominate other people. And as long as I don't get caught, then I'm good. And so there was just some super jacked up stuff, but it came to me from we're using rules in lieu of discipleship.
That's a great distinction. And I didn't pick up on that, but you're exactly right. You don't see them teaching truth. I mean, again, I haven't watched the show. Maybe they're doing that all the time. But what the kids are quoting, the kids are not quoting that stuff. They're quoting external rules. I didn't know the degree to which Bill Gothard and all these people, They voice their opinions about every single brand and idea. And they're telling their families, we don't buy Cabbage Patch dolls. What? Years ago, Harry Potter, that was a big topic in Christian circles. Or do we let kids have access to Harry Potter books and movies and paraphernalia? There was an age when I didn't want my children to have access to that stuff because they didn't understand spiritual power. And I wanted my 5-year-old, my 8-year-old, I wanted them to understand the Holy Spirit and that God's power is the true power. And I actually wanted them to have exposure to seeing that power and understand, okay, he's the power of the universe, and everything that agrees with him is good power, and every power that doesn't acknowledge him is iffy power. Okay? Once that's established in them as a foundation, well, then we can do Star Wars and Harry Potter, and I don't have worries about them praying to the Force because they know the Force, it was made up. It's a creative thing to tell this story, and they understand the truth. It's super concerning whenever there's, again, this very prescriptive thing about every kind of cultural artifact, and can you play with this kind of toy? And that's crazy. I just think, wouldn't you rather grow up children who had discernment as opposed to rule followers? And it doesn't seem that Jim Bob did that great.
I think about that even with this podcast, right? There's people that reach out that want more. What's the Abraham's Wallet way of doing things? And I've thought in the past, it would be easy for us as we think about a critical skills of money path or a just general, this is the Abrahamic way. It would be easy for us to say, well, here is what you do. You do Shabbat on Friday nights until Saturday
Right.
night, and you do these things. And when you're done with that, then you graduate to these things. And we don't shop at Target. Like, we're doing an Abraham's Wallet-wide boycott of Target and Bud Light. But we haven't done that, and I think it's been really good because some people that are listening, we would say, you don't have to do any of the artifacts that we do to kind of plumb the scriptures with us for how should you run a household. It feels like the IBLP went the other way and said, let's just systematize it to the point where you can really not understand any of it, any of the heart, but you'll look like a shiny, happy person. If you do it, if you do the things.
Last thing to say about true accusations is, I hope it's obvious to everybody that we would agree that inappropriately touching minors is wrong,
or anyone.
To hide sin is wrong. To have any sort of there's accusations made here about everything that Bill Gothard did sexually on the side. And one of the weirdest things about this guy, I never knew this about him, the dude never married and had a family. And back to your earlier point, why would you ever listen to someone's advice who is not personally running a family? The principle of eldership is whoever's faithful in a small thing could be faithful with more. So you would never have someone as an elder of your church who is leading families who is a single man. That wouldn't make sense. How can he lead other fathers if he hasn't done it himself?
That's what Amelia's first reaction was to learning about Bill Gothard. She's like, what? The guy is a single dude?
What Paul did was to reinforce Mosaic laws in the example of Abraham. And I think he pushed people back he's talking to people like the Corinthians, and he would say, this is the standard that God gives us. In places like Ephesians 6, he's describing the way that he does this in Ephesians 5 as well. Look, guys, this is God's word as far as how a family works. He doesn't do prescription that would require a first person. Here's what I think about how a husband should treat his children. He just puts God's standards forward to a church that was going bananas. So what he does is, in the context of grace and the gospel of Jesus, he reiterates these Mosaic standards for family, which I really appreciated. Aren't we grateful that he reiterated those things after Jesus, or else people would be all over the place trying to throw away the Abrahamic principles?
That was the number one Bill Gothard red flag that I picked up on from 10 minutes into when they introduced the guy.
Super creepy.
And then, of course, just to pile on to what you said before, there was cover up of abuse, like every corner of this story, from the big institutional level down to the individual Duggar family level. The people who make the documentary, and maybe we segue now into kind of illegitimate criticisms, they want to present it as if this is uniquely true of this organization. We know that's not the case. The more that it becomes okay, I think, which is generally a good thing, to put light on abuse that's happening, the more we're finding out that it's happening in all sorts of large organizations. I don't think that means, hey, it's normal and we shouldn't go after it. I think we should actually probably go after it a lot harder than we are. But it is true that this documentary tries to say, well, because of these beliefs about obedience, there's culture that's created where you can't possibly oppose someone, and therefore it's a grooming factory for pedophiles and abusers. I'm not sure that there's more of that happening specifically inside of kind of conservative Christianity than there is in other places, though.
You know, when a dentist goes in and finds a cavity, what they do is they scrape to the bottom of it and get it all out. They don't just go, we found it. Okay, we've acknowledged it, everybody, and put some goop on the top of it and go, let's not think about that anymore. Proverbs 28:13 says, he who covers over sin will not prosper, but whoever confesses and renounces them finds mercy. So just a tip, if you find yourself in a situation where you know that there's explosive sin just under the surface that nobody knows about, I strongly recommend that you take the low place, you get down low and you confess it and find mercy. And let's get to the bottom of it, get it all out. If we get serious about sin, we'll take those kinds of steps. And these guys freaking loved power and they loved money and covering over stuff. That was the Bill Gothard way. That became the Jim Bob way. It became what his children did, and it produced destruction everywhere. So just a little tip, don't do that. All right, now I'd like to get into some of the false accusations, of which there are many. Okay, I'm breaking whatever flow was happening at this moment, just to throw in a little bit of encouragement or warning to you all as we're talking about this series. Joseph said something very interesting in the book of Genesis when he's describing how the Egyptians would see his family. His family had come from their homeland. Here they're coming to Egypt to live for a while underneath his leadership and protection. And he's explaining how the Egyptians would see his family. And he tells his family in Genesis 46, verse 34, he says, listen, you should know this. Every shepherd of flocks is an abomination to the Egyptians. I think there's a great insight there. Every shepherd of flocks is an abomination to the Egyptians. Now, that's not to say that every shepherd of flocks is highly skilled. Everyone does an equally trustworthy job. Excellence is always at the top. That's not true. But we should know as family leaders, there is a spiritual truth here that shepherds of flocks are an abomination to the Egyptians. That is, people who watch over other people. Egypt is regularly representative of the world because they were opposed to Israel. And so there's a spiritual picture for us of people who are opposed to God-fearers. And you should just know, if you're going to take care of people, if you're going to lead people in the way that 1 Peter 5 describes, be a shepherd to the flock that's under your care, you should just know the world will look askance at you. It will look sideways at you. It will be suspicious of your motives. That doesn't mean that you're doing a great job or there's no room for improvement. You should simply know that you have an enemy, an unseen enemy, and you will be under suspicion simply because you want to shepherd flocks. So I bless you to be, I hope one of your takeaways in the last couple of episodes has been, I need to be tied to people who share my heart for family, my heart for following God. We must have around us bros who are walking in the same direction, because we certainly have a culture that sees us as an abomination. As Joseph said, in Genesis 46. All right. Little word from left field there for you. Back to the episode. All right. I want to get into some of the false accusations from this series. So I'm going to start with this quote. My jaw dropped when this dork Gothard said this.
Every one of us has umbrellas of protection. If we get out from under that umbrella, we expose ourselves to the realm and the power of Satan's control. As long as we're under these umbrellas of protection, Satan cannot get through with destructive temptations.
He says, if you're under proper authority, and what he means is a woman under the authority of her husband and a husband under the authority of God. If you're under proper authority, Satan can't get through. And I'm thinking, where on earth did you get that idea? How dumb is that idea? There are proper authority structures that God has laid out. But are you telling me that if you're in proper authority structures, that sin is impossible? What are you talking about? And that is obviously untrue everywhere. Really, what they're saying is a woman is in proper submission, then everything is okay. Well, it's not okay. It's just one of 100 things that needs to be in good shape. We believe there's 5 capitals. We believe all those should be in good shape, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a stupid accusation. It's not true. This refrain that goes throughout the series, it was in the first show, and there was the quote, Christians should have as many children as possible.
People say, well, how many children should you have? The answer is, how many blessings of God repopulate the nation with godly sons and daughters? Now is the time.
I don't know if they actually taught that. They never showed that actually coming out of somebody's mouth. But I would just say, for our part, we don't believe that. We wouldn't say that necessarily. We would say that we're fans of large families, and we believe that children are a treasure from the Lord. But we're also not prescriptive. And I would get really jumpy at somebody using the word should when it comes to family size. There's all kinds of decisions that God gives us the right to make decisions. Hey, children are a treasure. Hey, I really want to raise a family for him. And there could be any number of reasons why, hey, my wife has had it. My wife she's going nuts. My marriage cannot take another kid right now. There can be any number of reasons that you decide, I think God is telling us this is the size of our family. So we don't believe that statement. Christians should have as many children as possible. You mentioned the quote, this guy, that bald-headed dude in that show. There was a lady on there that fired you up, that you wanted to jump through the screen, put your feelings forward. Yeah.
I did consider whether it was time to bring in profanity to the Abraham Swap podcast, but I decided against it. But yeah.
Well, this dude, another author I've never heard of, Josh Pease, and one of the things he said was, everywhere this culture touches creates a pandemic of abuse. I would just like to say, again, they're painting such a broad brush. And if you mean the culture of the king and the culture of the scriptures, his word, I would just like to say no. Everywhere that culture touches creates a utopia of stable, divorceless homes, productivity, and prosperity for land and people and industry and meaning. It creates hospitals and universities and the greatest societies that have ever been created on planet Earth. That's what's happened when those cultures touch Earth, not your pandemic of abuse, which sounds very powerful. And how could anyone with a heart ever say that you're lying? Well, you're lying. That's not true.
Do you not think he meant the IBLP culture, though, when he said that?
That's not how they described it. So what they described was, for instance, father-led homes, people who go to pro-life marches. They're showing you these little windows, people who would homeschool. And then they make the statement, everywhere this culture touches creates a pandemic of abuse. So the idea is that a viewer who doesn't know any better, maybe somebody doesn't have any access to traditional Christian families. And so they think to themselves, good grief, those people are bonkers. I don't want to have anything to do with those people. And I would just say, you're wrong. That's not what happens when this culture takes place. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, again, I've told you my entire experience with the IBLP. Who knows? I'm going to go out on a limb and say a pandemic of abuse is not what has happened. We just heard that these people touched millions of people. Didn't they say something like millions of people? And are we aware of thousands of stories like the Duggars? Are you aware of 3 stories like the Duggars? So
that's hard to say. Who knows? I'm sure there were. To the earlier point, there's probably...
You've made my point for me, Mark, which is it's very hard to say that and to make a sweeping statement that everywhere this culture touches creates a pandemic of abuse. You simply can't make that statement. You don't know.
Fair.
I want to address an accusation that was punishing children and doing it in the name of God. There's children discipline that's painted up as these monsters who abuse these children. We've already described the ways that we don't agree with abuses that happened. However, the world believes, presumably, that children are not to be disciplined in any way ever. By the way, I know families that are run like this, where children are never corrected. One of their whipping boys, they put up, you might have seen, it was only up there for a second, but it was a pretty memorable image. A dude with a long beard, and he's got a doll on stage, and he's showing you how to whip this doll with a stick. I've been to that guy's seminars, by the way. And I'll just say this, I learned a lot from that guy. I respect that guy. I've heard that guy who seems so like they put a 3-second snippet of him up there and he looks so angry and bizarre. I've heard that guy teach on scads of the Bible that have nothing to do with child training, just all sorts of Bible teaching. I respect that guy. I have books of his that are not about parenting or family or anything. I respect that guy. I know enough about him to know his children all love him, and his children are all raising families exactly the way that he raised them. They would never use the word abuse with the regards to the spankings they endured as a child, etc. There is not abuse there. I can only speak there. There's not abuse there, and not all discipline is abuse. I think the in the name of God part is what makes the world squeamish. Not the fact that children are indoctrinated, because they are more than happy to do that at every possible opportunity. It's not the fact that children are indoctrinated in general. They don't mind that. They love that. It's not severity. From what I've seen, there's a lot more anger and screaming and violence out there in the world than there is among the God-fearing families that I'm connected to. And it's not making children bow their knee to a higher authority. They just have different allegiances than we do. And when you talk about doing that in the name of God, that's where they freak out. I just want to push back on this thing, like punishing children and doing it in the name of God sounds very scary and hyper-religious, etc. I can tell you why I discipline my children. It's because I fear God. I want the understanding of God to be in the warp and woof of our family and the reasons that we do things, including disciplining children. They want that to be a bugbear. They want that to be a dragon on the periphery. Oh, no. And I would just say, I'm not afraid of that. I don't actually think they're afraid of any of those things either. It's a grenade they throw over the fence at the Christians.
Yeah, and it makes it very easy for them to say, well, they're teaching spanking from the front of a church house. And then the next thing you know, there's a story of a guy actually sexually abusing a person. And
Yes.
they draw this line between those
Yes.
two where, we know that's a false equivalency. There's not causality between those two, just like they also could have shown, well, these people, they all wear ties to church, and look, there was abuse. It's
exactly right. That same dude, Josh Pease, said this: they made every father a cult leader and franchised, cute word, he could tell he's an author. They franchised physical, spiritual, and emotional abuse. Quite an accusation. So just to address that statement, a cult is a religious group with excessive control led by an unquestioned leader. Mark, you and I just did an hour last week on the kind of places we believe fathers should be submitted to and in obedience to. And we actually warned against unquestioned leadership where there's no recourse. Before he passed away, Michael O'Shields was somebody that I received from as a leader in my home. And I remember the first time he met with me and Dora, he gave Dora his phone number. And he said, anytime that you feel that Stephen is mistreating you inside this home or doing something untoward, as long as he's on my downline and I have any responsibility toward him, I want you to know that you have access to me. And I was kind of like, that's kind of sweet. That's pretty cool. I like this, that there's this safety valve on my leadership of my home, that if my godly wife who loves the Lord is ever screaming, going like, I can't take it anymore, it's not right, then she has access to the men who lead me in my life. That seems very reasonable to me. That seems like a good valve.
It's also worth saying that I don't know if you ever have heard this story, but I have a friend who was running around College Station and ran into Michael O'Shields and was getting some discipleship and was in a relationship. And Michael O'Shields kind of gave some coaching and even pushed maybe prescriptively in a direction for that couple. And the girl said, this felt wrong and no good to me. And a couple younger guys got together with that guy and said, we think this was sin, what you did. And he responded with repentance and said, well, I'll submit to a group of people too. So if he had said, no, I'm the apostolic leader here in authority over you guys, and I have spoken, so that is, then I think we would have known we've got more of a Bill Gothard on our hands.
Yeah, that's right.
But watching somebody actually repent or be willing to go, well, I guess I got it wrong, and tell me what I need to do to mend damages that I might have caused with that to me gives me more confidence in a leader. And it's a good way to say, is the type of leader I'm following somebody I can trust? Have I seen them maybe reverse course, repent, apologize, all that stuff?
We believe in a father leading his home. That's not our design. We read that somewhere in a book, in the oldest book in the world. But we don't believe in controlling every aspect of the home, as we've already said. And I just think this dude has an uphill climb to say that everywhere a father leads, there's physical, spiritual, and emotional abuse. Good grief, that is not true. So I just had to address that, because I know that statements like that are what is giving people the heebie-jeebies as they watch this, because they might not know 100 believing families. They hear this guy say that and go, oh no. And I'm just here to tell you it's not true. These people are describing, again, with such a broad brush, they're describing conservative historical Christianity, and they're saying it's patriarchal, and we know the red flags that sets off for everybody. It's authoritarian, and women don't have any rights. I just want to say women have more rights under the system ushered in by Jesus Christ in the scriptures than had ever been experienced in the history of the world before him. And I want to also say here that unlimited rights are problematic to any disciple. Me, any woman on the street, we don't actually have unlimited rights underneath God's leadership. We have more rights as Americans than we do as Christians. You have an American right to say anything you want to say. Underneath God's leadership, you don't have the right to say anything you want to say. You have to keep a guard on your mouth. You can't take the Lord's name in vain, for instance. Well, you can do that as an American. You can't do that as a Christian. So we don't believe in unlimited rights. Again, that's this bugbear that's thrown out there like, rights? Oh, they're trying to appeal to my Americanness. Oh, I wouldn't want anybody to have fewer rights. I want to raise people up who are from the CEO that's a Christian, to a father of a family, to a pastor, to a housewife. I want them all to be slaves of Christ. I want them to all say, I forfeit every right I have to whatever the Lord says for me. So again, I'm not questioning that there are families where there is oppression and that it exists. We're seeing that. We're seeing these girls say, if I wore shorts, I was out. I get that. But this broad brush with women have no rights under this system, it's not true. I remember telling my wife very early on, I just want you to know, I'll never divorce you. You are free to sin against me. You could bankrupt me. I'll never divorce you. You're free to sin. I'm going to do my best to forgive you, and I'm going to walk with you. That's how the Lord has treated me. It's the opposite of taking away rights. There are ways that are good for relationships. There are ways that are upright, etc. But to say women have no rights in a Christian home is balderdash.
wholeheartedly agree, and I would say that you can survey the women who are in healthy homes operating this way, and to me that would be a good way to do your homework on this whole series is, could we talk to some people who are thriving in these systems instead of only those who have been shot out the back and then eventually decided to dye their hair bright pink and gain 200 pounds.
Just as an aside, as I'm listening to all of these commenters who, especially for the girls who have come out of these homes, I don't condemn them for telling their story and telling it with tears and being angry at whatever produced the results they experience. I totally understand that. It's the people, particularly the outside, the third party commenters who are looking at that and saying, yeah, that's the problem with Christian families. That's who I have issue with. And it made me start to think those people, if we could collect all of their values, because they want to shoot down things like a father being in charge. They want to shoot down things like parents having the right to say yes or no about how their children are educated. And I started to think, okay, let's just collect what kind of world would they be happy with? How do they want things to work? And so I made a short list, and it is, obviously they don't like men-led families. So they want women-only led families. They want easy divorce without constraint. They want men who have no ambition to influence anybody else. That was a real funny point. I don't know if you saw this in one of the last parts. It was, guys, listen to this. They are training young men to be leaders in business and in politics. They actually want men to lead out in culture. I was thinking, do you not want to lead? Excuse me. Do you know there's a camera in front of your face with a microphone? It's Amazon Studios. Did you not want influence? Forgive me. I guess I don't understand what's happening here. Everybody who has a belief system that they want exported, they want influence. It's not a broken thing to say we want good men to have ambitions to have leadership and influence. Who here is grateful that George Washington had an ambition to influence other people? That's turned out pretty good for me. Anybody happy that George Patton wanted to influence his soldiers? That's turned out pretty good for me. So they want men who have no ambition to influence anybody else, never to be community leaders, never be government leaders, never to run universities, never run businesses. They want children who have never experienced discipline and grow up with no faith foundations. And they want children who are educated, conditioned, and programmed only by government-run educational institutions. Okay, I don't want that. I don't want to live there. I just don't want that society. And when you hear these people sound like they're kind of making good criticisms, I want you to ask yourself, what's the alternative? What's the world that they envision? Men are not perfect, and men leadership is not a sinless system. It just happens to be God's system. So we're trying to do what we can to serve that, to make it great for wives, great for children, great for society at the whole. I mean, that's why this podcast exists. We're trying to serve that thing, and we're trying to cut out the rot, cut out the disease from that thing, and make sure that the things that are healthy and holy get blown up. That's what we want. I just think the system that they're begging for is a disaster, which brings me to the next accusation that they make, which is homeschooling is the linchpin of this whole broken machine. Homeschooling is the linchpin. I just want to say for us meaning Abe's Wallet, I mean us as Christians, and I'm going to say this as the makers of this thing and the people who are critical commenters on this documentary, everybody is pro-indoctrination. We all want our children indoctrinated with the worldview that we believe is true. Everybody is for that. And I believe that we should be the ones who decide how our children are educated. I know that homeschooling is a place where wackadoodles can congregate. And newsflash, Holy Toledo, so is the public school system, a place where wackadoodles congregate. Again, I'm thinking, you're wrong. I hear the buzzer go off. No, homeschooling is not the linchpin. I know homeschoolers whose kids do not know how to do math and don't know how to analyze a sentence. And I know homeschoolers who are the top of their class, and universities are delighted to have them.
If It feels like
It's illegitimate.
It feels like it's just another manifestation of the principle that things done in isolation with no checks and balances have a tendency to spin out. So whether that's a church leader like Bill Gothard, who he can just say whatever he wants and nobody's going to challenge him, or if it's just inside of a household and mom and dad love patchouli oil and nature, so they take their kids on, barefoot walks in the forest instead of teaching them to read and call it homeschooling. Well, that's going to be bad too. I mean, there was some truly bizarre stuff that was, I assume, happening inside of the documentary in homeschool settings, like things that were being taught that were just crazy. But then they would try to also paint and say, and they also teach their kids that evolution is not the only possible theory for the origins of the universe. So it was dishonest. I don't think they were doing it with journalistic intent. And yet they did kind of stumble into the truth that you should probably shine light on things that you're doing and have community. And, we've talked about this on this podcast, like have a board of directors that gets to see all the corners of your home and make them diverse, meaning economically, and they're not all a part of the same small group. And like have a group of people from all over the different corners of your life that get to comment without reservation on what you're doing, and you'll prevent a whole lot of the weird crap that we saw on the doc.
Mark, I know you need to go, so you can sign off and I'll make my final 2 points and we'll close out. I know that we've gone long, and I know you've got somewhere to be, so
can I just say before we jump, this is the type of pop culture thing that we talk about once in a while, that it can really spur interesting conversations. You might have heard us say something today that you would say, I totally disagree with those jackwagons, and I want to talk about it. We have a community that's kind of a closed garden place for people who listen to Abraham's Wallet and support us to have those types of conversations. We upload videos and talk to each other, and we type things and put links in. And it's just one of those things. I would love it if you're listening to this and you don't have to agree with everything we say. This is not the IBLP, it's the AW. And at the AW, we like robust debate. So if you would ever be interested in participating in that community, you can go to abrahamswallet.com/donate. It has details on how you become kind of a part of that insider crew. And we welcome all sorts of opinions there. So maybe we get to continue the conversation offline in that setting after this episode.
Well said. Okay, thanks, Mark.
Bye.
Okay, I'll make my final 2 points, and then I'm going to make a conclusion and wrap this up. One false assertion was social media seems tailor-made for fundamentalism. I thought that might be the most laughable claim of the whole series. Who thinks that as you look through social media, the resounding sound you hear is fundamentalism washing over you like a tidal wave? That's insane. That's not what social media feels like. They said social media moves something from the fringe to the center of the conversation. And I would like to say to that, I couldn't agree more. It takes things from the fringe and moves them to the center of the conversation. That has happened in so many ways in the last 5 years. I could just say 5 years. When we all feel culturally like these things are at the center of what's happening because you see them on social media, then you go out into your normal life and you meet people and you do business and you buy things, just shopping and living your normal life. And you go, it seems like that's not really the center of my experience, but social media makes it think it is. And I would say the people making this documentary series, they are the beneficiaries of that truism much more than fundamentalism is. I don't even run into fundamentalism hardly anywhere in my life. So I thought that was insane. That's not true. So they're showing you all of these images. Oh, this person's on social media, this person. I wonder how long they had to look and how deeply to find 20 people who are representatives of fundamentalism on social media. I don't see them. That's an insane claim. The last thing that I saw as a really troubling statement was they used this Trojan horse of the abuse and uncovering abuse, and people were trying to put their lives back together, understandably, by asking questions. I have so much mercy for these people who are trying to put their lives back together. They're asking the questions. Well, wait, I had, say, for instance, I had an abusive father. So they're asking themselves, what is redeemable about fathering? Is it okay for a father to lead a home? There were Bible verses used in my house to control us. So they're having to do the work. Are Bible verses okay? Because they have this warped experience. Therefore, what we get in the last episode of the series is that deconstruction. They use this word. This is a magic word out in the culture. Deconstruction is how you find the truth. It's brave. It's honest. We champion people who are deconstructing their faith. We haven't talked about deconstruction on Abraham's Wallet before, but I'd just like to say, as a practice, it is outrageously destructive. Deconstruction is the idea that, okay, there's an assumption that God made the world. Yeah, but did he really make the world? Now, there's a point in your growth. Let's say you're a college student, you're being exposed to new ideas, and you want to get to the bottom of, say, comparative religions. And you go, look, I was raised as a Christian, but I've never really considered what if pantheism is true. Well, I want to consider that, and I'd like to compare the world thoughts against what I know to be true and was raised in. I think that's a very healthy practice. Your faith will come out stronger on the other end. I would totally recommend a book like More Than a Carpenter, Josh McDowell. There's all sorts of great material out there that is for the defense of the faith in the marketplace of ideas. Terrific. What's not terrific is I cannot trust anything that the Bible says, that my parents or my grandparents taught me, anything that historical Christianity has put forth. I must not assume any of those things are true. And the responsible thing is for me to question and challenge and to deconstruct everything that I have been taught. I don't think the Bible is true. Okay. Why do you think that? Well, I read this one person and so they're trying to put cracks into my belief system like this, et cetera, et cetera. Deconstructionism has been really torment on the modern family. It's not how you find the truth. Brave and honest is following Jesus with all your heart. And the way that you find the truth, he tells you the truth. Writers like Paul say what we're presenting to you is the truth. Go out there and compare it to the marketplace of ideas. Do what I did in this podcast. Compare the biblical standards for family. Just compare them to worldly standards for family. And then just ask yourself, which one is true? Which one seems true? What do I feel the Spirit of God inside of me saying? And by the way, one of the ways that we distinguish what truth is what have the believers said for the past 2,000 years? What's the historical church say? So deconstruction, not a good thing. I understand these people asking questions of their past. It's not a recommended way to be more whole. Conclusion. We were finally landing this plane. The statement I wanted to make about the whole series is that this series exists to further stigmatize family in general, fathers leading, parents leading their kids' education, and conservative Christianity in general. The Duggars and all of their problems, Bill Gothard world that they existed in, are an easy, highly public whipping boy for all of these beliefs that we are messed up people and the system under which we operate is messed up. That's why this series exists. I watched it with open eyes, thinking, well, maybe we'll just get the truth. As Mark said, it wasn't some investigative journalism. It was written with a slant, with a particular goal to stigmatize Christian family. So I mentioned this Psalm 2 verse earlier, and I'd like to close with it. It starts, the rulers conspire against the Lord and his anointed. Let us break their chains, they say, and let us throw off their fetters. That's the attitude of the world. Every constraint that God has put into place, let's break them and let's cast them off as they're evil, they're abusive. Let's cast them off. And the response is this. The next sentence is this. The one enthroned in heaven, it's a good way of describing God. The one enthroned in heaven, he laughs. the Lord scoffs at them, and he says, I have installed my king on Zion. And at the end of the day, the definitive last word belongs to the Lord. He can absorb all of the criticism that comes to him and to his anointed and to his ways and to his word. And he laughs at them and goes, I know what the end of the story is for you. Psalm 73 says a very similar thing. We know what the end of the story is. He doesn't sweat that accusation, and he shrugs his shoulders and he says, I have installed my king on Zion. He's given his final word, which is, my rule is absolute. It also happens to be good and merciful and right and pleasing. And I would say to any of you all, if you're rattled by this series, Philippians 4:8 says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is pure, whatever is right or lovely or honorable, if anything is excellent or worthy of praise, think about these things. I would just say, if you're finding yourself full of doubts and rattled from this series, I would say turn it off and come back to what's true and right and noble and pure. Looking at failures and abuses isn't really profitable for building up our faith. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody whose faith is weak. I wouldn't have you watch this show. I would have you watch it if you're confident in your faith, if you're a cultural critic, that is, you want to know what's happening in the culture and where it comes from. This is one of those artifacts that, as I said, points its finger directly at you and us. And so I wanted to give a response to it. We will come back next week with our next part of obedience. We are undaunted by accusations that we are oppressive tyrants. Not true. We are men who are under authority, and we are also supposed to execute some of that authority. So we will come back on that topic next week.
Hey, if you liked this content, be sure to like it and subscribe and share it with somebody. And remember, no matter how you're doing and leading your family, God's love for you is huge, and his grace is grand.